It was barely a whisper, so quiet that Sarah almost missed it. "I'm scared, Mommy," her daughter, Emma, murmured as she lay curled up in bed, her face pressed into the pillow. Her small hand, clenched tightly, still seemed to be fighting something, even in her sleep. Sarah paused, her fingers stilling as she gently brushed Emma's hair. There were no visible injuries, no signs of fever or anything to suggest that something was wrong. Yet, that fragile tremor in Emma's voice lingered in Sarah's mind, echoing with an unsettling weight. The words were barely audible, but they hit Sarah's heart like a stone, making her blood run cold. Sarah leaned over, her concern growing, but before she could ask Emma what was wrong, the little girl was already lost in sleep again, the moments slipping away like a forgotten dream. Sarah tried to push the fear aside, chalking it up to the usual nighttime restlessness, but the words lingered in the back of her mind, refusing to be ignored. What if that quiet fear, wrapped in a child's whisper, was the key to something much darker? What if behind every routine ride to school, something was hidden, something Emma couldn't yet understand, something Sarah hadn't noticed? It wasn't just a passing moment, it was a signal, and Sarah didn't yet know how far it would take her. Sarah had always prided herself on her ability to maintain order in her life. At 34, as a single mother, she had learned to balance work, her daughter, and the quiet moments of respite that made her day feel manageable. By day, she worked in an office, dealing with paperwork and emails, a routine that had grown comfortable, even if it was monotonous. Her work was predictable, and so was the rhythm of her home life. Every morning, she would wake up early to make sure Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, was ready for school. They lived in a modest apartment in Dallas, a place Sarah had grown accustomed to. Emma's school was just a few blocks away, and their lives were neatly divided into predictable sections of time: work, school, and a few quiet hours in the evening when Sarah could unwind, and Emma would quietly color or read. Emma was a lively and imaginative child, full of energy and creativity. She spent her free time drawing, often filling her sketchbook with vibrant pictures of animals, flowers, and colorful butterflies. Every evening, Sarah would come home to find Emma's latest creations spread across the kitchen table. The little girl's art brought joy to their small apartment, a constant reminder of the innocence and beauty that still existed in their lives. Emma's drawings were simple but full of life. Sarah often marveled at how much her daughter seemed to understand about the world despite her age. She was a sensitive soul, with a heart full of love, and Sarah felt grateful for her every day. Despite the challenges of single motherhood, Sarah felt like she had found her rhythm. She had a sense of security in the routine, in knowing what each day would bring. But that feeling of stability, of everything going according to plan, was starting to feel more fragile with each passing day. Little did she know, the comfortable world she had built for herself and Emma was about to be shaken in ways she could not yet imagine. Every morning, Sarah watched as Emma eagerly climbed into the back of the black car that would take her to school. The driver, Jake, was always polite and friendly, with a warm smile that made him seem trustworthy. He had a reputation for being kind-hearted, someone who made everyone feel comfortable. Jake had a way of talking to Emma that made her laugh and forget the nerves of the morning. Sarah never hesitated to let Emma go with him, feeling a sense of relief knowing her daughter was in capable hands. The routine was comforting, predictable, and safe. But one morning, something felt different. When Emma returned home from school, she was unusually quiet. The energetic, chatty girl who normally ran into the house, eager to share her day, now seemed distant. Sarah noticed how Emma slipped off her backpack without a word and went straight to her room. She followed her daughter, trying to engage, but Emma only shrugged when asked about her day. "How was school, sweetie?" Sarah tried again, but Emma didn't respond with her usual enthusiasm. Instead, she just stared off into space, the sparkle in her eyes replaced by a vague emptiness that Sarah couldn't understand. It was as if Emma was in another world, one that Sarah couldn't access. Days passed, and the silence continued. Emma, once so eager to recount every detail of her daily adventures, became withdrawn. She stopped talking about her ride to school, not mentioning Jake or the things they used to joke about. It was as if there was a wall between them now. Sarah began to feel a knot of unease tighten in her stomach, but she dismissed it, telling herself it was just a phase, that Emma was growing up and becoming more independent. However, the change was subtle but noticeable. Emma started to avoid talking about the car rides, and when Sarah asked, she would just mutter that she didn't like when Jake joked about how she was growing up too fast. It was a small detail, but it made Sarah's concern grow. What had changed between Emma and Jake? And why was Emma pulling away? The question lingered in Sarah's mind, growing more pressing with each passing day. One evening, as Emma walked into the house, Sarah immediately noticed that something was different. Normally, Emma would burst through the door, full of stories about her day, but today, she seemed unusually quiet. Sarah found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at a blank sheet of paper. The silence hung heavy between them, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Emma didn't seem to notice her mother standing there, lost in her own thoughts, her small fingers tracing imaginary shapes on the table's surface. Sarah waited, watching her daughter's distant expression, but Emma remained completely still, her eyes never leaving the blank paper. The next day, Emma handed Sarah a drawing, and at first, Sarah smiled, thinking it would be one of her usual vibrant and cheerful creations. But as she looked closer, her smile faded. The drawing was of a black car with dark, shaded windows, the kind of vehicle that seemed to belong to someone who wanted to remain unseen. Inside the car, there was a figure, but it was unlike any person Emma had ever drawn before. The figure had no face, only a blank, hollow expression that sent a chill through Sarah's chest. The longer she stared at it, the more unsettled she felt. It wasn't the innocence she was used to seeing in Emma's drawings. It was cold, empty, and strange. "What is this?" Sarah asked, trying to hide the unease that was creeping up her spine. Emma simply shrugged, her gaze still distant. "It's just a car, Mom," she said, her voice flat. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This was unlike anything Emma had ever drawn before. She had always been such a bright, imaginative child, and her art reflected that light. But this felt like a shadow had crossed her world, something that didn't belong in the safe space they had created together. The sense of dread began to grow in Sarah, and as she stood there, holding the drawing, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew this wasn't just a harmless doodle. Something was happening, something Emma couldn't or wouldn't put into words. And Sarah, for the first time, felt a rising fear she couldn't ignore. Sarah's heart raced as she sat at her desk, staring at the tracking app on her phone. For days, the nagging feeling had been growing stronger, and now she had the evidence. The app, which she had installed a few months ago to track Emma's rides, showed something troubling. Jake's car had been stopping at the same place every day, a desolate street corner, far from the usual road to school. There were no houses, no stores, just a stretch of abandoned land. Sarah's gut tightened as she zoomed in on the map, tracing the route. It didn't make sense. Why would Jake take that detour every morning? Determined to find out, Sarah decided to visit the location herself. She couldn't ignore the sense of urgency creeping through her. She grabbed her keys and left the house, her mind racing with possibilities. As she drove through the unfamiliar streets, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her eyes darting to every shadow that passed. When she reached the intersection, she hesitated for a moment. The street was empty, just as the app had shown. There were no signs of life, no children walking, no cars driving by. The only building in sight was an old house with curtains hanging loosely from the windows. The door was slightly ajar, an unsettling sight that made Sarah's skin crawl. The windows were covered with what looked like fabric, but it wasn't the kind of fabric you'd expect from curtains. It was darker, and it didn't move as the wind blew. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. As she scanned the surroundings, her eyes landed on the ground. There were fresh footprints leading toward the house, disturbingly clear against the dust. The air seemed to hold its breath as Sarah's eyes flicked back to the street, her pulse quickening. She checked her rearview mirror and froze. A figure moved behind one of the curtains, just a flash of something. Someone. Watching. It wasn't just a feeling of unease now. It was something deeper, more terrifying. The unsettling realization settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake. Something was terribly wrong. Something she had missed for far too long. The night before Sarah decided to take action, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The image of Emma's drawing haunted her thoughts. This time, it wasn't just a car. It was a dark figure with hollow eyes sitting next to Emma inside the vehicle. The fear that had been building in Sarah's chest over the past few days finally pushed her to the edge. She knew with certainty that something had to be done. Her daughter's silence had become a heavy burden, and Sarah could no longer ignore the signs. The image was a warning, one that Sarah could no longer dismiss as just a child's imagination. With determination, Sarah went to the police, providing them with the route data from the tracking app and Emma's drawings. The detectives began their investigation, but Jake remained calm, insisting that everything was a misunderstanding. He maintained that nothing unusual had happened, that he was just a friendly, trustworthy driver. But when the police began to examine the history of his trips and check his vehicle, they found troubling connections. Addresses linked to shady individuals and places that didn't seem to belong on a school route. As the investigation deepened, the picture grew clearer. Jake wasn't who he appeared to be. It didn't take long for Jake to be arrested. The truth came out slowly as Emma, now safe, found the courage to speak. She had been scared to talk before, terrified of what might happen if she did. Jake had threatened her, saying that if she told her mother, he would take away all her drawings. The revelation shattered Sarah. She had trusted Jake, believed he was a harmless, well-meaning person, but in her desire for normalcy, she had ignored the subtle red flags that had appeared along the way. Sarah realized the harsh truth. She had been blinded by her own assumptions and had failed to listen to the quiet signs of danger her daughter had tried to show her. The guilt she felt was suffocating, but she knew that this moment, painful as it was, could serve as a lesson. It was a reminder that, no matter how much we want to trust the world, sometimes danger hides in plain sight. Parents must listen, truly listen, to their children, even when their words seem harmless, even when it's uncomfortable. Emma's story became more than just a personal tragedy. It was a warning to others. Sarah's experience showed that trust should never blind us to the small details, and that the quietest fears could be the loudest alarms.